we are. Awesome. All right. I'm Paige. I'm an alcoholic. And welcome, everyone. So what we're going to be diving into today is step 4. And you might not share my enthusiasm for the 4th step, but I hope as we go through this process, you'll get a little jazzed about it. But Vivian was like, hey, can we do just a little bit of recap? And absolutely. So what we did in the 3rd step, the 3rd step was very simply a decision. The 3rd step was ultimately a decision, and we made that decision based on a couple important pieces of information. The 3rd step decision we made based on our 1st step experience. And that experience was the experience that we had with, I need to stay sober, but I can't stay sober. That profound experience that I know that I can never drink again, but I will. And that imminent, the acknowledgement of the imminency of the relapse is what dives us to lean in and look for a solution. Now, in the 2nd step, all that is asked of me is to believe that the solution is possible. What I mean by that is the 2nd step is very simply asking, is a spiritual experience possible? That's it. Is it possible? And I come to rooms like this with people like you, where you have recovered, the light is on in your eyes, the hope enters the room before you do, and you drank the way that I drank, you felt the way that I felt, you went through what I went through, and you have a solution. And the 3rd step is deciding, okay, knowing that if I stay where I'm at, I'm going to drink again. And that there is a solution, that permanent contented sobriety is possible. The 3rd step is ultimately, am I willing to do whatever it takes to get me there, to that solution? And that's what we're deciding. The 3rd step, am I willing to take the 12 steps as a way of life, like my life depends on it, because it does. That's what we're deciding. Now, if I make a decision but don't follow that decision up with action, I'm not going to end up anywhere. I'm going to be exactly where I am. And so let's just pick up on page 63. Now, I'm not going to do it line by line. We're going to bounce a bit. I'll get into a metaphor, and I apologize for anyone that was at the earlier Big Book study. I'm going to be doing that same metaphor, so sorry. All right, but at the very, very bottom of 63, it says, next we launched. So if I have made this 3rd step decision, the next course of action. Now, there's a little debate as to whether next is a unit of time, but for me, it implies some urgency. Next, I've got to do this. But launched out on a course of vigorous action. So it's giving us 2 verbs, I think. I don't know if I got the grammar right, but it's given us 2 words that describe how we're approaching this 4th step. We're launching. Now, there are a whole lot of words that we could use that don't necessarily sound like launch. Like, and I was using some of these words at the earlier study, like dawdle, like stroll, like waltz. Like, you know what I mean? It's not saying we stroll our way into the 12th step or into the 4th step. It's saying we launch. So if we think about the word launch and we think about launching, that implies some velocity. How do I get velocity? That is consistency with action. So, and then it says vigorous action. Rude. It's asking me to, I know, it's almost like we're going to have to do some work in this 4th step. My goodness gracious. It's a whole lot of stuff. So, but this course of vigorous action, so it's going to be vigorous. And one of the things that I would implore is if we're starting on the 4th step, is to dive in, to go after it, to write on it consistently. And like, I know it's a big ask, but at least an hour a day. It doesn't have to be an hour consecutively. but at least an hour a day, every day, because I got to get this thing done. And there is no worse place for me to be than avoiding my fourth step. A lot of times when we talk about step 4, it's like, oh no, watch out. Ooh, it's scary. No, the scary thing is not doing it. That's what's terrifying. Avoiding it, like that's where the pain is. That's where the suffering is. It's not in the doing it. And like I did at the other study, I'm going to talk about ways in which we can really practically move through this fourth step. But it says, on a course of vigorous action, the first step of which is a personal house cleaning, which many of us had never attempted. So what we are going to do is clean our house. Now, spoilers, I'm doing the metaphor. So what I believe is at the very center of my soul, there is a spiritual house. Now, all my metaphors are consensual. So if you're like, I don't like this metaphor, you don't have to, it doesn't apply to you, I'm not talking about you. But if you are picking up what I'm throwing down, what I want you to know is at the very center of your soul, there is a spiritual house. And what I want you to know is that house is good. That house is worthy. That house is valuable. Man, and I really need to look up some other architects, but like if your house was made by the most incredible capital D, capital A divine architect, man, you have a Frank Lloyd Wright spiritual house. The property value on that bad boy. Like, oh, look at you. And it is worthy, and it is good, and it is valuable. And that is what is at the very center of your soul, if you're picking up what I'm throwing down. Now, at this moment, I am no longer talking about your house. I'm not talking about it. I'm talking about my house. We're talking about my house and only my house. And I want you to know, the problem with my house is I'm a spiritual hoarder. It is bad, y'all. Call in TLC, call in the cameras. I am a hoarder. It's not good. I joke, you can smell it from down the block. Spiritually, it's got an aroma. And so what do I got to do? I've got to clean that house. And that's what the fourth step is going to be about. Now, let me explain this metaphor kind of in its fruition. Now, again, I want to be very clear. I'm not talking about your house. I'm talking about my house. But in my house, I've got these things. Now, I know you guys can't relate, but they're called resentments. I know, just me. And my resentments are like newspapers that are decades old. And yes, decades. I have been alive for multiple of those, but decades old. And my resentments, they're like newspapers, decades old. And they're piled all the way from floor till ceiling. And what happens is when these newspapers are piled all the way from floor to ceiling is it blocks out the windows, which blocks out the light. And I'm sitting alone in this darkness. And I know I'm the only one here. No one relates. This is my house. But I've got these things, and they're like fears. I know, I'm the only one. And my fears are like empty bottles and cans that are strewn all over the floor. And because I'm in darkness, I can't see where I step. I can't see where I stand. I can't see where I'm moving. And every time I move, they clank and clang and sound bigger and louder than they really are. And I know I'm the only one, but I got some sex conduct. I know. And it's a little like the dead cats behind the freezer. I can smell them. I know they're there. Now, I also want everyone to know that this is a metaphor. No cats were harmed in the making of the spiritual metaphor. All the cats are fine. They're okay. And so what do I got to do? I can't live in that spiritual house anymore. I've got to clean the house. And so what do I do in the fourth step? I begin to clean it up. And that's what we're going to do. And so I begin to pull down the newspapers and put them into bags and into boxes. And as I do that, I have a look at these newspapers. I have a look at these resentments, and I see them in a new way. And I begin to see that the information was wrong the whole time. You see, I thought they said extra, extra. Everyone else is a jerk. But it turns out, as I had a second look, it was extra, extra, I'm the jerk. And that's truly where the freedom lies. And if you've written inventory, you know that's where the freedom is. And as I begin to see the truth about these resentments and I begin to put them into bags and into boxes, what happens is the windows begin to get clear and that light begins to come into the house. And some of you guys know I love the metaphor of God as light. And it's a metaphor that we see all throughout this book. And the reason I love it is because light is not simply what I see, just like God is not simply what I see. Light is also the way in which I see, which is to say God is also the way in which I see. Bear with me with that. I'm in the basement and there's a room to my right and it doesn't have any windows. And the light is off in that room. And if I go around the corner and I turn on that light, everything in that room has changed. And yet nothing in that room has changed. The way I see it has changed. Now we can hold up our experience. Those of us who have written inventory, is that our experience where everything has changed and yet nothing has changed? What do I mean by that? Well, if you've ever written inventory, you know that experience of like, hey, my childhood got better. Childhood didn't change. Family got better, and family didn't change. For those that are married or in a relationship, spouse got better. I promise you, spouse didn't change. Jerks in traffic, jerks at work, they started to change. But they didn't change. How I see them changes. And it's that idea that, of course, I promise you, if you go and you invite God and you watch for God, wherever you go, you will see evidence of this power. God, higher power, the creator, the spirit of the universe. But God also becomes the way in which we see, from which we look, from which we orientate ourselves. And so I begin to clean that up and the light comes. And as the light comes into the house, I begin to see how if I rely on that light, I don't have to live in that fear. And I begin to clean up those empty bottles and those empty cans. And then I deal with the cats. No cats were actually harmed. I deal with the cats. And what happens from that is I create a sane, sound ideal for my future sex life that I take to prayer, that I take to meditation, so that I can be a responsible spiritual pet owner in the future, so that I don't have to live in that guilt and that shame that I was feeling when I was, living the way before. And if you're wondering, okay, then what happens? I've got all that stuff into bags and into boxes and I see it. Well, what I'm going to do is in the fifth step, when I sit down with God and another human being, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all that garbage out of the house. And once I've done that, I take it and I take it to the curb. And what step 6 and what step 7 is all about is about becoming willing and then asking for the cosmic garbage man, the spiritual 1-800 junk guy, to come and take it away. And that's what I am doing in the 4th step. Another way to look at that is that I'm going to be clearing away the channel. There is a power that is available to me. But as we spoke about in step 3, I'm blocked. I'm blocked by the various manifestations of selfishness, self-centeredness, 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. I am blocked, and I need to get unblocked. And steps 4 through 9 is the process that allows that channel to get unblocked. And if you're wondering, 10, 11, and 12 allows that channel to stay clear. So the 3rd step, am I willing to clear the channel? The 4th step is how we begin it. And so that's what we're doing with this personal inventory. All we are trying to see is what is blocking us. Now, on page 64, this first full paragraph, I don't have the time to do it line by line, but it's going to give us this inventory, or this metaphor of a commercial inventory, like a business. And it's saying it's a fact-facing, fact-finding process. All I'm trying to do is see what is blocking me from this power and how can I get unblocked. That's what we're trying to do. What is blocking me? And it goes on to say we did exactly. So the next paragraph, second full paragraph, I know I'm bouncing a little, but as we've been doing lately, it is sequential bouncing, not all over the place. And for those of you that have been hanging with me for a while, you're like, that's not bad. We're not even going to Roman numerals or nothing. So we'll take it. And welcome those that are new to this study and that are like, we're doing what now? But it says we did exactly the same things with our lives. So we're trying to see what is blocking us. What isn't working? We took stock honestly. First, we searched out the flaws in our makeup which caused our failure. So what in me is blocking me from this power? And it goes on to say, being convinced that self manifested in various ways was what had defeated us. We considered its common manifestations, the self manifested in various ways. We saw that in step 3 when we saw that us trying to manage and control our life and the outcome, it wasn't working. And so what are the common manifestations of self? What are we looking at for those common manifestations? So we're going to look at 3 things. And those 3 things are going to be the 3 parts of our 4th step inventory. So the common manifestations of self, the first part is resentments. The second part is fears. And the third part is sex inventory. So those are the 3 things that we are going to be looking for and looking at in our 4th step. And I emphasize that because, and I was sharing this earlier, I can't tell you how many times I'll sit with a sponsee and I will explain to them the common manifestations of self, and we're looking at those 3 things, and that's what we're going to do. And there's 3 sections, and we're going to get all of our resentments done, and then we're going to do all of our fears, and then we're going to get all of our sex inventory done. And then we're done, and then we're going to do a 5th step and blah, 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 and I explain that. And I can't tell you how many times I'm the jerk who, when a sponsee comes and is like, I finished my 4th step. And I'm like, oh, you've just done resentments. You're a third of the way. And I'm the big meanie pants. And I told them, but I'm saying it again. So I like to say I'm the big meanie, but I'm the big meanie up front. So it's not a surprise. So we got 3 sections. And we're not going to get through all 3 sections today. My thought and my hope is that we'll cover how we do resentments and go through resentments today. And then we'll probably do fears next week. And depending on how I do for time with fears, the following week we'll get into sex contact, or we'll do fears and sex contact together. And that is my ideal, my goal, or as we like to say, my little plans and designs. And we'll see how that goes. But that's what we're aiming for. So if I miss it, well, I messed up. So that's on me. All right. So let's talk about how we set ourselves up for success. The first thing that I am going to need to write inventory is a notebook. And this is a good size notebook in terms of paper size. It's A4 page, it's standard. I don't recommend going too much smaller than that in terms of paper size. And unless you're somebody that's got teeny tiny writing, I've been known to have teeny tiny writings at times. And I know it's like, girl, are you a serial killer? Nope, just when I do evening review for a couple of years, I really wanted to write tiny. And I don't know what that was about. But I would say this is a good size of standard sheet of paper. I don't recommend going too much smaller, but you'll notice that this one says 80 pages. 80 pages is probably not going to be enough. Don't freak out. This is not going to be an ecologically friendly way of doing inventory. We will make amends to the trees. We can recycle, if you're like, but Paige. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get that notebook. And actually, I like to make that joke. Let's not steal it from work, because that's not a good start to the 4th step. And I can't tell you how many times I made that joke and then people got offended. Oh, I would never. I'm like, okie dokie. I would. I was joking at the other one. I'm like, there's not much I would steal, but it'll do a lot, but it'll also foster a very surprising love of stationery that I did not suspect. You know what I mean? And so my other stationery suggestion is to get a pen. Now, when I say get a pen, I don't just mean any pen. Now, we don't have opinion on what pen that you get. You don't have to use this one. But get a pen that you like writing with. Like, get a pen that's got smooth. If you like smooth, if for whatever reason you like a scratchy pen, you get yourself a scratchy pen. But get a pen that you like writing with. Do not get like a junk drawer pen that doesn't work and you got to scribble on an envelope and like, if you've ever done the lighter trick where you like burn it with a lighter a little bit to see if you can get the ink flowing, don't get one of those pens. Just make your life easier and get a pen that works, that flows. Now, before I do any work on a 4-step inventory, the first thing that I always want to do is I want to start with a prayer. So anytime I'm writing on inventory, start with a prayer. Now, you can use any prayer that you want to use. Any prayer you want to use. You can use, the 3rd step prayer. That's a great one. You could use a prayer from the heart. I always like to say something like, God, I pray that you would be with me during this process. I pray that you would guide my heart, guide my mind, guide my pen. Reveal to me that which you think I need to see so that I can draw nearer to you. Or something like that. You know what I mean? Any words you want, but just to invite that power into this process. Now, I often forget to do this, but at the end, it can also be helpful to say a prayer at the end. Now, a lot of how I do the 4th step and how I set it up, which comes out of the book, like I'm not just making things up, but how we set it up and how we do it is in such a way that it takes a lot of the overwhelming emotions out of it. I'm not saying we're not going to have feelers as we go through it, but those overwhelming emotions, we're going to take that out of it. In how we do it. But there are times where we're going to be talking about some hard stuff or writing on some hard stuff. And so it can be helpful to say a prayer after we write. And the prayer, again, you can use whatever prayer that you want, but it could be something like, God, I pray that you would help me to leave the thoughts, feelings, and emotions of this inventory contained within the pages of this notebook. Help me as I go out from here to better do your will, not mine be done. Something like that. Now, that's just something I recommend, I suggest. Do it or not, you know what I mean? And then, so before we do anything else, we got our prayer, we said our prayer, we got our notebook, we got a pen. What we're going to do is we're going to sit and we're going to draw lines. Now, what it's going to be one line horizontally across the page. And from that horizontal line, we're going to draw 2 lines up. And what that does is that creates 3 columns, 1, 2, 3, and a 4th column on the bottom. And then if you are somebody that's a big, bless you, if you're somebody that's a big, I know it's the worst when I do that. If you write very large, I'd recommend leaving the backside blank. If you have big writing. And if you have tiny little serial killer writing, like I've been known to at times, actually as my eyes have gotten worse, my writing's gotten bigger. So, but you flip the page and you draw a line horizontally across and 2 lines up. And you're going to do that on like 50 to 100 pages. And don't worry, you cannot do too many lines. Now, some of you are thinking, can't do too many lines. That's old behavior. It's not old behavior if we're still doing it. And all I'm going to do is make that joke. Hey, I didn't have problems doing lines before. It's a very easy way to get into that 4th step. We're just going to draw these lines. Again, on 50 to like 100 pages, line across, 2 lines up. And again, if that's a little hard to see, what I'll do is I'll do a little screen share with the resentment columns, just so that you can kind of see what I'm talking about. And don't worry, like we're going to delve a lot deeper into this. But what we're going to do is it's going to be 1 resentment per page. And then when we're done all of our resentments, we're going to use the same physical piece of paper page layout for our fears for our sex conduct. So you really can't do too many lines. And setting it out like this gives us a lot of room to work. And a little trick is column 1 is just going to be a single name. So we don't have to give it a whole lot of space. So I often use that little red line. I often use that for that 1 line as a guide, and by the way, if you want to use a ruler when you draw your lines, amazing. If you don't want to use a ruler, I don't care. It does not matter. It really doesn't. They can be squiggly or perfect. It doesn't matter. Now, the third column, it's just how I do it. It's just going to be from this list. So the third column, you don't need a whole lot of space there either. And even the second column, you might want to make it a wider column, but we're gonna be doing point form. We're not going to go into too much story. But what we're gonna see is where we're gonna spend a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of our writing is going to be in that fourth column. So, and for anyone that's like, and again, I'll screen share that as we continue on. For anyone that's like, oh, that would be helpful, please remind me. I will make sure I put that, and I have a whole PDF of all the inventory stuff that I do. I'll put that in the chat, and I'll put it in the WhatsApp chat as well after. But I probably will need reminding. So let's go back to the book. So we got our lines, we got our pen, we prayed up. All right, let's go. So what we're gonna do is very bottom of page 64. It says resentment is the number one offender. So what is a resentment? What we're gonna look at first is our resentments. Resentment is the number one offender. What is a resentment? A resentment, its etymological origins, because as y'all know, I am fun at parties. The etymology of the word resentment is French, and resent is to refeel. So a resentment is a refeeling of a negative emotion. So if I have a negative feeling about a person or a situation, write it down. And it says it's the number one offender. So hey, we're looking at resentments first, because there's a lot of destructive power in resentments. It says it destroys more alcoholics than anything else. Oh, yikes. It looks like I need to be free of these. And it says from resentment stems all form of spiritual disease. So from a single resentment can spring all forms of spiritual disease, of spiritual illness. And it says, for we have been not only mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick. So when we talk about being mentally and physically ill, to be physically ill, what we are speaking about specifically is the physical allergy. That once I start to drink, I can't control the amount that I take. And when we talk about being mentally ill, we are only talking about the obsession of the mind. And the obsession of the mind is the sober thought that I have that takes me back again and again and again to the first drink. This time will be different. Nobody will ever know. Just get out of my system, etc. And it says, when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. And when we say, we're in the chapter, how it works. If you're wondering, how does this work? How does it work in Alcoholics Anonymous? This is how it works. I treat the spiritual malady. The spiritual malady, it's not limited to alcoholics. There are other human beings on earth who have it. But we treat that spiritual malady. We treat it with the spiritual awakening that happens as the result of the 12 steps. And when that spiritual malady is treated, it says we straighten out mentally and physically. That is the order. When the spiritual malady is treated with the spiritual awakening, the obsession of the mind leaves. It's gone. And if you're like, girl, I don't believe you. Well, I don't have time to take you there, but you go check out those 10-step promises. They're bad. And bad as in like, ooh, it's bad. Anywho. But there's some pretty awesome promises. And if the obsession of the mind is gone, if that is relieved, then I don't take the first drink. And if I don't take the first drink, I don't set off the phenomenon of craving. I don't set off the physical allergy. And what is important is that is the order. We treat the spiritual, and when we treat the spiritual, the obsession of the mind is gone. And when that's gone, I don't take the first drink. And so it says, in dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. So we got a resentment, we're going to set it on paper. Now, unless somebody does have disabilities that make pen to paper difficult, I do really recommend doing pen to paper. We might argue, hey, we didn't have computers. They didn't have computers back then. They did have typewriters. In fact, much of the book was written on a typewriter. Bill Wilson was dictating to Ruth Hawk. So they had typewriters. So there was a similar technology. And this is a little bit of page lore, little lore drop, and it's lore drop that'll terrify you. I used to be a tutor. I know. They let me in charge of teaching and math and stuff. Yikes! But I used to be a tutor, and there's a really powerful connection that's made from like the hand to brain when we write it out, when we make handwritten notes. It really helps with that like processing and retention, and I've seen it again and again. So I don't mandate, when I work with sponsees, when we're doing the first one, I'm like, let's do pen to paper. And if we have to do big stuff, we'll do pen to paper. But let's give that a go, because it's powerful what happens. So it says, so in dealing with resentments, we set them on paper, pen to paper. Now, it doesn't matter the color of your pen. It can be black or blue. Yellow's maybe not the best, but you can do pink if you want. Red's a little aggressive, but you do you. You can even do pencil, although the problem with pencil is that over time, it fades because of like flipping pages and stuff. So I'm just giving you that information, but I've had people use pencils, and I'm like, that's not a hill that I'm going to die on. I'm not dying on that hill. All right, so this is the very first column. We listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. And so what we are going to do, that is column 1. And I want to be very clear, what we are going to do is one column at a time. That's all we're going to do, one column at a time. So I have, this is a little example of what that's going to look like. So we've drawn our lines, and what we're going to do is who goes in the very first column 1? It's mom, because it's always mom, and then we flip the page, and then it's dad, and then we flip the page, and then it's the ex, and then we flip the page, and then maybe it's another ex, and then we flip the page, and maybe it's the jerk who speaks at meetings too long, and then we flip the page, and that's what we're going to do. And we are going to list all the people. And what I'll do is I'll put up the screen share so y'all can see it. So we're going to list one per page. Name, flip the page, name, flip the page, name, flip the page, name, flip the page, until we feel like we're done. And so who can we resent? Who are the people that we can resent? Well, we can resent family members, former relationships, friends, best friends, doctors, psychologists, judges, police officers, people we casually come into contact with, employers, employees, co-workers. And when I've worked with sponsees, a lot of times, I'll share this, one of the most powerful things that I can do as a sponsor is to sit with my sponsees as they write. And I spoke about this at the earlier study. But what I do is I'll sit with my sponsees, and we can get the lines drawn out and get columns 1, 2, and 3 done in an hour or 2. It gets it done. It overcomes a lot of the fear, a lot of that executive dysfunction, a lot of the perfectionism, a lot of I don't know how to get started, and we're right in the middle of it in literally no time. So when I sit with my sponsees, they'll be almost every time, I don't have very many. Actually, some of them are like, no, I got a lot. But most of the time it's like, I don't have that many. And then we start going, and I start suggesting some people. And then one of the things that I'll sometimes do, and as the result of this is nobody will want to be Facebook friends with me, that's fine. But if we're Facebook friends, I'll go to their Facebook and I'll have a look at their friends list. I'm like, who's Joanne? How do we feel about her? Just give some gentle prompting. Now, institutions. What is an institution? Well, that could be any sort of like system. So hospital system, medical system, criminal system, mental health system, addiction system. Alcoholics Anonymous is an institution. Rehabs are institutions. Companies. I know nobody here resents the telephone company for the bill that we haven't paid, or Visa. They keep calling me to pay them back. It's rude. Those are examples of institutions. Now, principles is where we can often get a little bit more, the IRS, or for the Canadians, the CRA, multinational options, international, those sorts of things, absolutely. Those are examples. And principles, so those can be things like organized religion. That could also be an institution. That could be like any of the isms, like resent racism, sexism, etc., etc. It could be resenting different ideals, different, if I have God resentment, this is where I put it. God, column 1, flip the page. I can you resent having to do resentment inventory? Write that down. Resent inventory, resent amends, resent working with others, resent prayer, resent meditation. You can resent having to be honest, having to be open, having to be willing. You can resent alcohol. You can resent alcoholism. You can resent, if you have somebody in your life that struggled with addiction, you can resent addiction. You can resent drugs. Those are all examples of principles. And so again, we write, and we don't have to be perfect, but if we sit and we write until we kind of feel like that might be it, we can always add more later. Don't overthink it. And the result of that is we're going to have a lot of pages. So 1 name per page. Now, when that is done, what we're going to do, the very next direction at the bottom of page 64 is we asked ourselves why we were angry. So when we're done all of column 1, we go back and we start in column 2. Why am I angry? Why do I have this resentment? Why do I have this refeeling? And really quick, the biggest thing for column 1 is don't self-edit. If a name comes to mind, write it down. Just write it down. Don't self-edit. Don't, resentment's the number 1 offender. You know the worst thing that could possibly happen from writing down a resentment? It's you wasted 10 minutes of your day. In total, working on that resentment. In absolute total, at most 10 minutes. And what happens from it is you now have more experience that you can use to help others. You have more freedom. You know what I mean? There is no downside. So do not self-edit. So when we get to column 2, why am I angry? And so even how the book lays it out, it is do this, period. Then do this, period. So it's for me emphasizing 1 column at a time. And that takes a lot of the overwhelm out of it. But when we talk about why am I angry? Why do I have this resentment? What I want to do is I want to be point form. So we don't want to write out the whole story. We want to be succinct. Point form. If you see the example on page 65, it's, his attention to my wife, told my wife of my mistress, Brown may get my job at the office, boom, boom, boom. Point form, because I don't need to get into the story. But I will say, in column 2, be as petty as you really are. If you want to use some bad language, this is the only place you get to do it in the step work. So if you want to bring in some bad words, you got to use them right here. Be as petty as you really are, because it helps us to see the truth. Now, when we get all of column 2 done, what we're going to do is we're going to go to column 3. And column 3, so a lot of people take their column 3 from the bottom of 64, but I take it for the top of page 65. But don't worry, we're going to touch on the exact same things. So I'll read through so we can get it. So it goes on to say, in most cases, it was found that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relationships, including sex, were hurt or threatened. So we were sore, we were burnt up. And then it says on our grudge list. So this, for me, is the direction we set opposite. So we have the list, all of column 1. We have why we got the grudge, all of column 2. And now what we're going to do is we're going to set opposite these injuries, these affects mine. It says, was it our self-esteem? So if a resentment that I have affected my self-esteem, what that looks like is, did it make me feel worse about myself? Did it make me feel like I didn't belong or I didn't matter? That's what we're talking about. Did it affect my self-esteem? And then it says our security. Now, I think it's helpful to break down security into 3 types of security. So it affected my self-esteem, I just write self-esteem. If it didn't affect my self-esteem, I don't write it down. If it affected my physical security is, was I physically hurt? Was I physically threatened? Was I physically in danger? If yes, write it down. Then emotional security. Did I feel emotionally unsafe, emotionally threatened? If yes, then all I need to do is write down emotional security. Financial security. Did they take my money? Did they take my stuff? Did they threaten my job? If yes, write it down. And then it says our ambitions. Now, my ambition is my desire to go out and do things in the future. And if I had, like, let's say I had a teacher that was really mean to me, that would affect my ambition to maybe study and go out in school and try. Now, if I had an ex-partner who cheated on me, maybe that affected my ambition to go and pursue further relationships. And if it feels like it affected my ambition, I write ambition. That's all I need to do. And it says, so was it our self-esteem, our security, our ambitions, our personal or sex relations which had been interfered with? So did it affect my personal relations? Did it affect my relationship with all of my platonic friends, co-workers, Did it affect my sex relations? Did it affect my romantic or sexual connections? Now, I'll point something out. I don't have had romantic or sexual connections involved for it to affect my sex relations. For example, if you had like some like mommy issues or daddy issues, even if there was no inappropriate sexual conduct, we can say like, hey, they didn't model good behavior. That affected my sex relations. Or, and I know nobody here can relate to that, but you're living in a treatment center or a sober living house and you want to sneak out at night so you can hook up with, our deep love with the grippy socks, and the treatment center won't let me. Well, that's going to affect my sex relations. So I can write down sex relations. And what we're trying to do in the third column is ultimately see the depth of the resentment. We're trying to see how deep is this resentment. Because the more of these that are affected, the deeper the resentment. Another way to say it is the deeper the resentment, the more areas of my life that are affected and the desperate need that I have to be free of them. And that's what we talk about a lot on, and like, I'm not going to go through it line by line, but on page 66, it talks about I need to be free from resentments, because if I don't, it will block me from that sunlight of the Spirit and I will drink again. I don't have the luxury of a resentment. It is the dubious luxury of somebody who does not have alcoholism. But even then it wastes and blocks them from joy and freedom and happiness. So what we're going to do is when we get all of that done, and what I like to do is I like to go to the very back of the book. So when we go into the fourth column, I don't start at the front of the book. I like to recommend starting at the back. What I mean by that is who's at the front of my resentments? Mom, dad, the ex. And what you'll find is a lot of the people at the front of the book are what I like to call a full house. They affect everything. And then as we go towards the back, now there's always going to be one or two little heavy hitters in the back, usually something really traumatic that we were like feeling, maybe it didn't even come up until we started writing, but some near the back. But by and large, the ones at the back are my sponsor who wants me to be of service, or, the jerk at the meeting who shares too long. Like, it's usually those easy ones where only a few of them are affected. And we're going to work back to front. But before we write on any of our fourth columns, what we're going to do is we're going to utilize the prayer on page 67. So it's on page 67, first full paragraph. And the paragraph starts, though we did not like their symptoms. Their symptoms is column 2. And the way these disturbed us, where we were disturbed, that's column 3. They, like ourselves, were sick too. Now we're going to come back to that. And then it says, we asked God. And any time in this book it says we asked, that is a prayer. So it says, we ask God to help us show them the same pity, patience, and tolerance that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. When a person offended, we send to ourselves, this is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God, save me from being angry. Thy will be done. And so this is how I say the prayer. Let's say I'm resentful at a guy named, I'll use Bill Wilson. I'm not, but I'm like, I was trying to think of a generic name, and I'm like, with my luck, we're going to have somebody with a generic name, and I don't want nobody to have hurt feelings, but you can write inventory on me. That's perfectly fine. So let's say I'm resentful at Bill Wilson. I'm not. But how I would say it is, God, help me to show Bill Wilson the same pity, patience, and tolerance that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. Bill Wilson is a sick person. How can I be helpful to him? God, save me from being angry. Thy will, not mine, be done. And let's say I had a resentment towards the IRS, which would be wild because I'm Canadian. But let's just say I did. So how would I say that prayer? God, help me to show the IRS the same pity, patience, and tolerance that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. The IRS is a sick organization. How can I be helpful to it? God, save me from being angry. Thy will, not mine, be done. Similarly, let's say I am resentful towards the principle of having to be honest. Ugh. God, help me to show the principle of honesty the same pity, patience, and tolerance that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. How can I be helpful to them? This principle of honesty. God, save me from being angry. Thy will, not mine, be done. And so that's how we can say it. Now, some of the ones near the front of the book, they often require what I talk about as a little bit of spiritual elbow grease. Now, I'm not able, just in respect of time, I'm not able to go into too much detail about some of these extra prayers and meditative practices to help with the spiritual elbow grease. But if I start at the back of the book, it often gives me some time to say these additional prayers for people who are those heavy hitters. And so if I'm looking for additional prayers or additional actions, there's wonderful directions on page 552 that give me spiritual directions to pray every day for 2 weeks and to pray everything I want for myself to be given to them, pray for their health, their prosperity, their happiness, and every day for 2 weeks. There's also meditative practices like a loving kindness meditation, a Ho'oponopono meditation, and I know it's, how do you spell that? So you just look up Hawaiian forgiveness meditation, that'll get us there, or a Tonglen practice, and those are helpful meditative practices, just some spiritual elbow grease for some of those tough cookies. And I'm going to say the page, at minimum, the page 67 prayer for each and every resentment before I write on that fourth column. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do is on page 67, it says we avoid retaliation or argument. We wouldn't treat sick people that way. If we do, we destroy our chance of being helpful. We cannot be helpful to all people, but at least God will show us how to take a kindly, tolerant view of each and every one. And that's the most powerful thing, is this prayer is not me praying for them. It is, I'm praying that God will change how I see them and how I show up to them. And then I'm asking, how can I be helpful? What a radical prayer. But I'm going to go to that fourth column. Now, the first prompt that I really like to use, it comes from the top of 67, where it says, they like ourselves were sick too. And if you're feeling really stuck, or you're working with a sponsee who has a really hard time getting into that fourth column place, that fourth column mindset, what we can do is we can start with, have I done these things? So let's say I'm angry at somebody. I will ask myself, have I done these things? Now, I want you to know the answer is always yes. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the scope. So the answer is always yes. So let's say I got that resentment to the IRS. Why? They take all of my money. Have I ever stolen from others? I write down, I've stolen from others. They're bureaucratic and they don't, it takes forever to get a hold of them. Have I ever avoided my responsibilities? Do I make up rules that I expect other people to follow? You know what I'm saying? So we apply it. Yes, the answer is always yes. And we narrow and widen the scope. Now, the second prompt that we're going to use, it comes from on page 62, where we made a note of it. It says, on page 62, selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. Well, at the very end of that paragraph, it says, sometimes they hurt us seemingly without provocation, but we invariably, which means pretty much frickin' always, find that at some time in the past, we made decisions based on self, which put us in a position to be hurt. So what does that mean? Where did I make a selfish, self-centered, self-seeking decision which put me in a position to have this resentment in the first place? Now, because it's a little bit conceptually difficult sometimes, what we're going to do is let's go to page 65. And what I'm going to do, I might be pushing it a little for time, so please forgive me if I go a little over. Page 65, and let's look at the example. So the first example we have is Mr. Brown, and we're going to find where did we make a decision based on self with each of these examples. So what I would do, now to be fair, if I was doing this, I would go back to front. So I would start with the wife, the employer, Miss Jones, Mr. Brown. But just for the sake of, making it easy for us today, we're going to start with Mr. Brown. And so what we would do is we would say the prayer, God, help me to show Mr. Brown the same pity, patience, and tolerance I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. Mr. Brown is a sick person. How can I be helpful to him? God, save me from being angry. Thy will, not mine, be done. And when we look at why I am resentful at Mr. Brown, it's because his attention to my wife. Told my wife of my mistress, Brown may get my job at the office. My mom, not an alcoholic, and to be fair, I did give it to her as a gift because I thought it was funny. She has a mug that says Mr. Brown needs to get his ass kicked, which is just delightful. My lovely non-alcoholic mom just using that, like, who's Mr. Brown? But we say that prayer. Now, can we find where we might have made, if this is our inventory, a selfish, self-centered decision that put us in a position to be hurt? Now, I hope this is not news. Is it possible that it might be a little bit, just a tad, selfish and self-centered to have a mistress? And that if I don't have a mistress, Mr. Brown does not have anything to tell my wife? And listen, I'm an alcoholic. I don't have one mistress, I have two. I have the mistress that is my wife, and I have the mistress that is my alcoholism. And I'm not giving any time or care or attention to my wife. And if I were to give some time, attention, and care to my wife, is it possible that Mr. Brown wouldn't have some wiggle room to sneak on in? And is it possible, now we're going to get to it, but is it possible that I might not be the best employee as an alcoholic, and that's why he might get the job? And those are some examples of decisions based on self. Now, let's go on to Miss Jones. Miss Jones, so I would say, God, help me to show Miss Jones the same pity, patience, and tolerance that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. Miss Jones is a sick person. How can I be helpful to her? God, save me from being angry. Thy will, not mine, be done. And why am I resentful of Miss Jones? Well, she is a nut. A nut. She snubbed me. Can you believe it? She snubbed me. Ugh. We're not getting into selfishness or self-centeredness there. She committed her husband for drinking. He's my friend and she's a gossip. Well, let's start with decisions based on self for that whole gossip thing. What I'll throw out is that if I don't have a mistress, she probably doesn't have anything to gossip about. You know what I'm saying? And I can imagine that Miss Jones maybe isn't super keen on her husband hanging out with somebody who's actively having an affair. Maybe I'm not a good influence. And here's the thing, Mr. Jones and I are drinking buddies. We're running buddies. We're doing this thing together, and not for an instant do I care about him and his health. I care that I'm missing my buddy. And what we're like, the visual that I always have in my mind is that we're hanging out in the Jones house, and we're getting drunk, and the kids are scared and they have school in the morning, and we're making a ruckus. I'm so thoughtless. I can't imagine what I put Miss Jones through. And I wonder why she snubbed me. I'm not being a good partner, I'm not being a good example, and I'm not being a good friend to Mr. Jones. Of course she would snub me, and of course all I can think about is me. My employer, unreasonable, unjust, overbearing, threatens to fire me for padding my expense account. So we say the prayer, God help me to show my employer the same pity, patience, and tolerance that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. My employer is sick. How can I be helpful to my employer? God save me from being angry. Thy will, not mine, be done. Now, if you're wondering, what is padding our expense account? Because I am not a white-collar human being. I've not had an expense account to pad. But what it is stealing. I am stealing from the company. Just going to throw it out there. Stealing is perhaps a little selfish, a decision based on self, right? That's part of why I mentioned, hey, don't steal your notebook. And listen, I don't know what type of employee you were, but I was showing up sometimes, and sometimes even sober. But you know what I mean? Like, I wasn't showing up all the time. I was showing up hungover, drunk. I wasn't doing the work that I was supposed to do. And I thought, and I would show up with that attitude of you're lucky to have me. I do so much, right? And if I'm not showing up in that way, man, I'm not in that situation. It goes on to say, my wife. So I'll say the prayer, God help me to show my wife the same pity, patience, and tolerance that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. My wife is a sick person. How can I be helpful to her? God save me from being angry. Thy will, not mine, be done. And so the wife, misunderstands and nags. I wonder what she would have to misunderstand and nag about. The mistress likes Brown, wants house put in her name. And so where did I make a decision based on self? Well, I don't have that one mistress. I have two. I'm cheating on her, I'm breaking the marriage vows, and I'm not showing up as a partner in that relationship. Now, as we approach some of the chapters in this book, I actually find it really helpful to lay aside what I think about gender norms in the 1930s. But the reality is, in the 1930s, my wife might not have even been able to have her own bank account. And we saw what type of provider I was being. You know what I mean? I made that vow, I will provide for you, and I'm not doing it. I'm about to lose the job. And so why would she want the house in her name? So she could have a little bit of security, because I'm not providing it. And so when we talk about decisions based on self, which later put us in a position to be hurt, that's what we're talking about. Where did I make a selfish, self-centered, self-seeking decision that put me in a position to have this resentment? Now, we'll find that for all of our resentments with a few exceptions. On 66, it talks about the wrongdoings of others, fancied or real, had the power to actually kill. And there are times, especially when we were children, we were really hurt. And it wasn't a fancied, made-up thing. We were hurt. And we had no decision based on self, childhood abuse, sexual abuse. We had no decision based on self that put us in that position. And so with those sorts of resentments, we don't look backwards, we look forwards. And so what I mean by that is, what my decisions based on self begins to look like is, did I drink at it? Did I avoid seeking help for it? Did I re-victimize myself? Did I use it as a reason or excuse to hurt others? That's the tact that we take. Now, the last thing that we're going to look at in our resentments inventory is we go back to page 66, where it says so on the third full paragraph, referring to our list again, putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done, we resolutely looked for our own mistakes. And it says, where had we been? And I really want to emphasize, it's not had we been, it's where had we been? Selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and afraid. And when I show up to my resentments with the assumption that, yes, I have been selfish, I've been dishonest, I've been self-seeking, and I've been frightened, and I look for where, that just opens up that experience that I have, and I get to see things in a new way. So what does selfishness look like? Selfishness, some examples of selfishness, and if you're wondering, I do have an example sheet of the fourth column, and if I am reminded, I will put it in the chat and the WhatsApp chat after for anyone that might find that helpful. But selfish can look like me playing God, me trying to control, me thinking I know what's best, only thinking about myself. Dishonest, it can look like lying, stealing, manipulating. But just as much as it can look like walls and masks, ego and image maintenance. It can look like saying yes when I need to say no. Those are some examples of dishonesty. Now that self-seeking, it can look like judgment, criticism, gossip. Because self-seeking for me is trying to get from you that which I need to get from God. So the manifestations of things like codependency, self-seeking approval, validation, affection, attention, the need to be right and the need to be seen as right. Because I can't just be right, y'all. I got to be right with an audience. I need you to know that I'm right, and I need unilateral agreement on my perpetual correctness in perpetuity, I know you guys can't relate. And those are some examples of self-seeking, that those things where it's like I'm trying to give myself a boost of better than ego. And then I look at where was I afraid? And that those fears of not getting what I want, fears of losing what I have, fear of rejection, abandonment, not having control, fear of being alone, fear of being unloved, fear of the core of who I am is unworthy and unlovable. And then the fear at the core of my being, I am unworthy and unlovable and everybody sees it. Those are separate. Those are just some examples. And when I break down resentments in this way, I get a full picture of who I am. And a full picture of the reality of the situation. And I've got some news is when I write them out in that way, if I find that I owe an amends, which happens, I've got the amends pretty well, like not all of the fourth column, but almost all of the fourth column, I can then take to my amends. And I'll wrap up with this because I know I am pushing it. I'm pushing it. But also the inventory process that we learn in step 4. It's not a one and done. These columns that I'm using for resentments, and next week we're going to talk about fears. But these columns that I use, these columns that I utilize, I'm going to use them in the 10th step. And I'm going to use them in the evening review. I'm going to use them when a resentment pops up in the here and now. And this is how we get free of it. And so with that, what I will do is I will stop the recording and I'll turn it over to Vivian.